What's up, everybody? This is Stuart Knight, author of the books Marginalizing White Supremacy, Poetic Visions, A Steep Mister for a Sister, and my latest work, A Spirit the World Has Forgotten. And today I'm going to talk about this little rising tiff between the people who represent the ADOS movement, American descendants of slavery, and the people who are staunch, die-hard Pan-Africanists. You know, many of the people in the Pan-Africanist community, they feel that the ADOS is trying to break off and form some kind of separatist sect and not keeping with the unified philosophy of Pan-Africanism, which was put forth many years ago to consolidate the African fight against white supremacy, if you will. They didn't label it back in them days. But to consolidate the fight that black people must have against the forces which oppress us, from here in the Americas to the Caribbean to the English territories, and specifically on the continent of Africa. Now, what is not understood is that long ago, white supremacy worked very effectively in separating black people behind the tribalist philosophy. You know, many of the colonialists, they went into Africa and got the African people to actually fight themselves, and they still do to this day, as a matter of fact, behind the concept of tribalism. You know, the idea that certain separate sects of African people have their own ethnic identity based upon the lineages of their families, you know. And many of us haven't really, especially many people in Africa, have really not grasped yet that the tribalist concept is what white supremacists use to actually further divide black people across the world. And today, for many of those black people who make the notion that the ADOS movement is somehow xenophobic or doesn't like immigrants or is anti-Pan-Africanist, you know, they're completely and totally wrong. Because one thing, you know, white supremacy, although it functions as a cohesive unit, it has separate factions of how it's practiced. Thus how the English practice slavery, thus how the Italians practice slavery, how the Dutch practice slavery, and how the Americans practice slavery. Their ways and methods of enslaving African people and practicing colonialism are totally different. So what we as black people must do, we must alter our tactics in fighting against that. You know, you see, we can still remain Pan-Africanist and operate as separate factions in that fight against white supremacy based upon how the white supremacy was leveled by the particular ethnic groups of the white race. So take, for instance, you know, you got like British slavery. The British enslaved Africans from the continent and took them to the West Indies. And then you have like the Italians. They took a lot of their Africans to the islands of South America, the sugarcane fields of South America. And they practiced slavery a little bit different. They took a lot in to their countries, and they practiced slavery different. And then you have those who brought slaves to the Americas, and they practiced slavery different. So in doing that, they really broke up the common ideology that many African people had by separating the languages. So today, in many instances, you have a lot of Africans who come, as far as, you know, the ADOS and here, black people here in the States, who are immigrants to this country, and as soon as they get here, they're taught to actually hate the foundational black people here within this country. And they, you know, use such terms as, you know, oh, we come here and we make it and we have no problem, you know, and why come you can't, you know? They do not see the extra benefits that they might be getting from the white institutions, you know, that are not afforded to foundational black people here in this country. So instead of actually being able to take in that understanding how white supremacy functions to keep us separated, they actually buy into it and go along with it, you know, in many instances, not all, but in far too many instances for American black people to say, hey, you know, to practice the Pan-Africanist philosophy and concept to its fullest and say we're all the same, we're all black, and we're all, you know, oppressed up under white supremacy the same. It's not so. So keep this in mind, when you talk with a lot of the people who are out there Pan-Africanists, understand that, you can still fight a common fight against that common enemy on separate fronts based upon the manners of oppression of which they practiced against you. So, like, say, for instance, the Jamaican descendants of slavery. They might have a different form of attacking the British as far as their reparations, You can say the Haitians descendants of slavery. They might have, a different form attacking, the people who colonized their country as far as the French and the Americans, for a sense. Then you can say the Brazilian descendants of slavery. They might have a different argument and fight against the tactics that were used against their people by the Portuguese. And then upon the continent of Africa specifically, especially since a lot of what the white supremacists were able to accomplish was through disuniting and separating the people based upon tribalism. And they still use it to this day to steal the resources, as a matter of fact. Many of the Africans on the continent have to learn how white supremacy functions, for one, and then begin to weed out the subversive elements that exist within their own tribes and communities. So that way they too can form a front against white supremacy in the form of the separate states of Africans against colonialism, AOC, or Nigerian descendants against colonialism. See, different methods were used by white supremacists under the same ideology in their sense of one of oppression, and to be able to use and pilfer the natural resources from the people resources and the mineral resources for their own enrichment. We as a people have to learn to understand that. So the ADOS movement is not anti-Pan-Africanist. It is Pan-Africanist in its pure form, in the sense it is forming a tactic of which to attack white supremacy that cannot be rebuffed or reproven too easily, and it causes that enemy to fall off balance and maybe open up avenues to where they can be defeated. So get with it, people who are Pan-Africanists, and understand, form your own sects and your own unions and operate along with the ADOS for a common goal. And that is definitely getting recompense for the enslavement and colonialism of our peoples. Once again, this is Stuart Knight, author of the books Marginalizing White Supremacy, Poetic Visions, A Steep Myster for a Sister, and my latest work, A Spirit the World Has Forgotten. Peace.